Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep, deep into some 1970s history.
Ooh, the
Yeah,
70s.
and this is, well, let's just say it's going to feel a little bit like a Hollywood thriller.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So picture this, okay?
Huh.
1970s California.
All right.
Social and political turmoil, radical movements, and anxieties that honestly feel ripped from today's headlines, right?
Yeah, I can see that.
We're going to be looking at not one, but two assassination attempts on President Gerald Ford.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In September 1975.
Okay.
And what makes this even more interesting is that the people who tried to do this, they were two women who, on the surface, at first glance, seemed completely different.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
No, that is fascinating. It really shows how individual lives can kind of get swept up in these larger societal trends, you know? And the
Yeah.
70s were a time of huge shifts in American culture, especially in California.
Absolutely. I mean, this is the time of the Symbionese Liberation Army,
Right.
Patty Hearst, the Zodiac and Zebra murders,
Oh, yeah.
and the kind of the lasting effect of the Manson family.
Right, right.
All this anxiety about violence and social upheaval was just woven into everyday life.
Yeah, it was a tense time for sure. And then you have these two women, Lynette Squeaky, from
Yeah.
a Manson follower, and Sarah Jane Moore, who was, well, seemingly an ordinary housewife
Right.
who ends up caught in this radical underground.
Yeah.
Their stories offer a glimpse into what drives people to do extreme things.
They really do. And we're going to break all of that down for you today,
Mhm.
pulling from this great podcast called Rip Current.
Okay.
They do a really good deep dive on this. And of course, we've done some extra research on top of that
Yeah.
to give everyone a full picture of, well, this pretty wild chapter in American history.
I'm excited to hear it.
Yeah. So one of the most interesting things is that even though Frum and Moore came from totally different backgrounds,
Mhm.
their stories both show this thing called rapid, under duress radicalization. It's basically when someone's exposed to new ideas or really intense, high-pressure situations, and it just completely changes their beliefs and actions, sometimes really fast.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like they were both caught in these historical currents that just reshaped them.
Exactly. And to understand their stories, we really need to consider the big picture of the 1970s.
Right.
You know, all the social and political divides, the economic uncertainty, and just this widespread feeling that the system was failing.
Yeah. It was a time of upheaval, that's for sure. So let's start with Lynette Frum.
Okay.
Now, a lot of people probably remember her as the Manson girl who tried to, well, assassinate President Ford.
Right.
But her story goes way deeper than that one act. She was completely devoted to Manson even after he went to prison for the Tate LaBianca murders.
Yeah, I remember.
And her life took all these twists and turns that, eventually led her to that day in September 1975.
Yeah. It's interesting. Frum's story is kind of this paradox.
Okay.
On the one hand, she was famous because of Manson, but she was also totally isolated from society.
Yeah. Nobody would hire her, right?
Exactly. Because of her past, she lived on the fringes,
Yeah.
completely dedicated to Manson and all his twisted ideology.
And this devotion showed up in some really strange ways.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for example, her environmental activism in Sacramento.
Right.
She worked on that with another Manson follower, Sandra Good.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And their methods, let's just say they were a bit outside the box.
Oh, really?
Yeah. They'd send these threatening letters, like really threatening letters to CEOs,
Wow.
government officials, warning them about, environmental problems.
Okay.
And get this, they had this, like, look.
A look.
Uh-huh. Long robes and these floppy witches' hats. They really stood out,
It sounds like they were almost creating their own little protest movement, like their own theater.
Yes, using shock tactics and these crazy images to get attention for their cause.
And did it work?
Well, they even went so far as to create this whole fake organization. Yeah. It was called the International People's Court of Retribution.
That's quite a name.
Oh, yeah. And they said this court would, carry out assassinations.
It's assassinations.
Yeah, to protect the environment.
They were blurring the lines between activism and something much darker, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. We actually had some recordings of Sandra Good.
Really?
Giving interviews, talking about this court and their goals.
What are the recordings like?
They're pretty chilling, to be honest.
Oh, wow.
You can just hear how much she believes in this mission, in their twisted mission.
Uh-huh.
But there's also this undercurrent of aggression, this willingness to use violence.
Yeah.
Scary to hear how radicalized she was.
It's like you're listening to someone who believes that extreme actions are completely justified.
Exactly. And it might seem weird that Fromm was so focused on environmentalism.
Right. It does seem kind of different from the Manson family crimes.
But, Manson himself had this whole twisted environmental philosophy.
Oh.
Yeah. He thought that humanity was destroying the planet, and he predicted this apocalyptic race war because of it.
He called it helter skelter, right?
Yes. So you could see Fromm's activism as a continuation of Manson's ideas.
Oh, wow. Like she was trying to make his vision happen.
Yeah, even though he was locked up.
That shows how radicalization can take different shapes but still be rooted in the same core beliefs.
You're right. And it reminds us that even good causes, like environmentalism, can get twisted
For sure.
and used for dangerous purposes.
That's a good point. Understanding those subtleties, those little shifts in how someone thinks is crucial if we want to get why someone like Fromm went from a cult follower to trying to kill the president.
Absolutely. And it's a journey we'll keep unpacking as we go. But before we get too far into that, let's switch gears and talk about the other woman in this story, Sarah Jane Moore.
Okay.
Now, her story takes us into the heart of the 1970s radical underground.
All right.
So we have these two women from completely different worlds, both radicalized, both on this path towards trying to assassinate the president.
That's incredible. What happens next?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Let's dive into Moore's story and see how she and Fromm end up on this collision course with history.
So Moore's story, it all kind of comes back to the Patty Hearst kidnapping.
Right, right.
This is 1974. And the Symbionese Liberation Army, the SLA,
Yeah.
they kidnap Hearst, right? And Moore gets involved with a group that's trying to, get her released.
Okay.
And that's when things really change for her.
So she starts out wanting to help.
Yeah, help free Patty Hearst.
But then how does she end up an FBI informant? And how does that lead her to all these, radical groups?
It happens so fast. Through the Hearst thing, she meets these former prison radicals, people who thought the prison system was, super messed up. Like a symbol of injustice in society.
Yeah.
And she's just drawn into their way of thinking. The FBI sees this as a chance, so they ask her to go undercover, infiltrate these groups and report back.
Wow, that's a big change.
Right. From just a regular person to an undercover informant. It must have been really intense for her.
Yeah, I bet. Dangerous even.
Oh, for sure. Imagine trying to manage all these secret meetings,
Right.
coded messages,
Yeah.
constant suspicion. And this is before cell phones or anything like that.
True.
It was all face-to-face, often in risky places.
Yeah.
The pressure on her to keep her cover and get information for the FBI must have been huge.
I can only imagine. Was she able to, separate those two worlds? Or did being around these groups start to change her own beliefs?
That's the fascinating thing about Moore. It gets to the heart of rapid radicalization. The more she's in these circles, the more she starts to actually believe what they believe.
Wow.
It's like the line between being an informant and her own views just gets blurry.
So she wanted to help Patty Hearst, but it turns into this whole other thing.
Exactly. And it shapes what she does in ways she probably never expected.
Right. It's a real example of how just being in a new environment, especially one with high stakes and strong opinions, can change who you are, how you see the world.
It makes you think, could any of us be changed like that?
Yeah.
Especially in the 70s with all that pressure and anxiety.
Yeah, that's true. California back then, it was like a breeding ground for unrest.
It was. There was this feeling that people had that the system was against them.
Right.
It was rigged.
Yeah. And we've already talked about the SLA, those murders, and the whole Manson thing. But there was also this counterculture movement growing, right?
Absolutely.
People were rejecting mainstream values,
Yeah.
looking for different ways to live.
Like communes, alternative spirituality.
Exactly. And environmentalism was on the rise.
Right. It felt like society needed a total makeover, and a lot of people, young people especially, were drawn to groups that, promised a better world.
Yeah. So it's easy to see how someone like Moore, caught in all of that, could be pulled in, get swept up in the hope for change.
And remember, not all these groups were about violence.
Sure.
A lot of them truly wanted peaceful change. But the lines could blur.
Yeah.
Even in groups that seemed peaceful, there was a chance for radicalization.
It sounds like the 70s were the perfect recipe for this rapid radicalization.
It really was. You had the social and political turmoil, then you add these counterculture movements, and then on top of that, the intense pressure of being an FBI informant.
Wow. It's like a perfect storm.
Exactly. It pushes someone towards extreme beliefs and actions.
So we have these two women, both radicalized, both on a path towards an assassination attempt. But what were their reasons? What did they think they'd gain from targeting President Ford?
Well, that's where the stories kind of go in different directions.
Yeah.
For Fromm, it seems tied to her devotion to Manson. She saw Ford as a symbol of, like, the man.
Right.
The system that Manson was always against. It's almost like a twisted kind of love.
But she was trying to impress him, even though he was in prison. That's really messed up.
It's possible. Remember, Manson predicted a race war, helter-skelter?
Wow.
Some people think Fromm was trying to make that happen. Bring about the collapse of a society she saw as corrupt.
But what about more? Her reasons seem less obvious.
Yeah, they are. People still debate them today. Some think she was acting for those radical groups, maybe to cause trouble or make them famous. But others think it was more personal, like she was trying to regain control of her life. Because, things had gotten out of control for her.
So her attempt on Ford's life, it could have been a cry for help.
Yeah, maybe. She was under so much pressure from the FBI and the groups she was spying on.
Yeah.
Real danger and the weight of all her lies, the fear of being caught.
Right.
It might have just pushed her too far. It reminds us that even things that seem political can have really personal reasons behind them.
That's a lot to think about. Two women from totally different worlds, both caught in this crazy time, both driven to try to do the unthinkable. What happened next?
Well, that's where we'll pick up next time. We'll look at the fallout from these assassination attempts and what they tell us about security and how we understand radicalization.
It's been quite a deep dive, hasn't it? Lynette Fromm and Sarah Jane Moore, two women from such different backgrounds, both trying to assassinate President Ford, just weeks apart.
It really is remarkable and kind of scary to think about all the chaos and fear that must cause.
For sure. But what happened right after those attempts? What was the immediate reaction?
Well, in both cases, things moved pretty quickly. Fromm, thankfully, was stopped right there at the scene before she could actually shoot.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, her gun jammed.
Oh, wow.
And the Secret Service was on her right away. She ended up getting a life sentence for the attempt.
Wow, a life sentence.
Yeah, though she was paroled in 2009.
Okay. So even though she didn't actually fire, they didn't take it lightly.
Not at all.
And what about Moore? What happened with her?
Her case is a bit more complicated.
Okay.
She was also caught quickly, but she did actually fire a shot at Ford.
She did?
Yeah, but she missed, thankfully. And even though she was an FBI informant, that didn't really matter at her trial. She was found guilty, and just like Fromm, she got a life sentence.
Wow.
But she was released on parole in 2007.
It's interesting that being an informant didn't help them more during the trials.
Yeah, it makes you think about how the justice system works, especially in cases like these.
Right, with national security and undercover stuff?
Exactly. These cases raise a lot of questions about, how we use informants, the risks for everyone involved, and what happens when it's time for a trial.
It's complex, for sure. And even after they were released, both women were still kind of famous, in a way.
Right. It's not every day someone tries to kill the president and then gets to, live a normal life again.
Yeah, exactly. What happened to Fromm?
Fromm never really wavered. She kept supporting Manson, even visited him in prison until he died in 2017.
Wow.
It's like all those years in prison didn't change her beliefs.
It shows how strong those ideologies can be, how hard they are to break.
For sure. And more.
Yeah, what about her?
Moore's been pretty quiet since she got out. Hasn't really talked about her past publicly.
It's understandable, wanting to move on.
Yeah.
But their stories, together, they really paint a picture of this crazy time in America.
They do.
And they make us think about security, radicalization, all these forces that shape what we believe and what we do.
One thing that really stands out to me is how easy it seemed for them to get close to President Ford, especially Fromm, considering her connection to Manson.
Like today, that would never happen.
Right. It shows how much things have changed, how we see threats differently now.
Back then, the idea of a woman, someone like Fromm, being a real threat to the president, it probably seemed crazy to people.
Yeah, and it's not just about gender either.
Right.
It's about how our understanding of what's dangerous, who's dangerous, it's constantly changing.
It makes you wonder, are there things we're missing now? Threats we're not seeing because they don't fit what we think a threat should look like.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Especially now with all the political division and social unrest and all the new technology that could be used in ways we haven't even thought of.
It is a lot to think about, but I think that's what's so great about studying history.
Yeah, I agree.
It makes us face those uncomfortable truths. Challenge what we think we know, and maybe see patterns we wouldn't have noticed otherwise.
Exactly. These assassination attempts, as strange as they seem, they give us a way to look at these bigger issues.
Yeah.
Radicalization, how society reacts to anxiety, and just how unpredictable people can be.
They remind us that history isn't just, dates and facts in a textbook.
It's a story that's still unfolding, still affecting us.
And a story we need to learn from. So as we wrap up our deep dive into these assassination attempts on President Ford, we want to leave you with this. How do we as individuals, as a society, prevent extremism and violence? What are the signs that someone is becoming radicalized? And how can we build empathy, understanding, and critical thinking to create a safer, more peaceful world? If you're interested in learning more, keep digging, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.